The purpose of this video is to provide educators with knowledge of working memory and its crucial connection to students' academic achievement, as well as evidence-based strategies for remediation in the existence of difficulties within this area of cognitive functioning.
Children with learning disabilities are a diverse group of individuals exhibiting potential difficulties in many different areas. For example, one child with a learning disability may experience significant reading problems, while another may experience no reading problems whatsoever, but has significant difficulties with written expression or mathematics. Learning disabilities may be mild, moderate, or severe, and students may differ in their coping skills depending on their personal strengths and weaknesses. Learning disabilities arise from neurological differences in brain structure and function and affect a person's ability to receive, store, process, retrieve, or communicate information. These disabilities are both real and permanent and are best described as unexpected significant difficulties in academic achievement and related areas of learning and behavior in individuals who have not responded to high-quality instruction and for whom struggle cannot be attributed to medical, educational, environmental, or psychiatric causes. Students with learning disabilities will often demonstrate problems in cognition. Cognition is a broad term conveying many different aspects of thinking and problem solving. Multiple brain processes are involved in learning, such that disruptions in any one process may result in a learning difficulty. One important predictor of learning ability is working memory. Working memory is the ability to store and manipulate information within a short time period. It enables one to pay attention, remember, and act according to immediately received information. Working memory is an important component of executive functioning and is believed to be fundamental to problem solving. Thus, working memory is essential to acquisition of new knowledge and skills and is essential to optimal completion of classroom activities that require memorization of instructions and those that require information processing and endurance. Working memory skills present high risk of underachievement and underlie difficulties in learning, mathematics problem solving, and specific reading disorders. An example of our use of working memory in everyday life is mental math. Consider attempting to multiply 63 and 11 without using a pencil and paper or a calculator. To do this successfully, it is necessary to store two numbers and then systematically apply multiplication rules, storing the immediate products that are generalized as we proceed through the stages of calculation. It is only if we manage to meet both the storage and the processing demands of the activity that we can reach the correct answer. The following is an additional explanation of working memory and an example of its application within the classroom.
Working memory is often referred to as an active mental workspace. It's a cognitive system that allows us to hold and manipulate information online for a few seconds during problem solving or other cognitive activities. And it's this internal representation in working memory that we use to guide our decision making, so that behaviour and actions are not dominated by immediate sensory cues in the environment. By contrast, long-term memory is often referred to as a filing system for a more stable or longer-term storage of information. And typically, cues in the environment or in working memory trigger the need to rapidly retrieve information from long-term memory and bring it into working memory along with other types of information. Conversely, information in working memory may be reorganized and encoded back into long-term memory. Here's what might happen when a teacher gives instructions out of order and they are interrupted.
Okay, students, take a look at your math worksheet. Note there are addition and subtraction questions. Make sure you don't use the wrong sign. And remember, I want to see how you solve the problems.
Children in the band, please note that band practice will be in the gym at 12 noon.
Oh, and before you start, remember to put your name and the date on the top of your worksheet.
This is an illustration of working memory in a typically developing child. As the first instruction is given, the student retrieves relevant information from long-term memory to hold online in working memory. Now the student interprets and generates internal representation of the teacher's rather complex instructions and holds those online. With the PA announcement, the student extracts critical information and stores it in long-term memory for later use, and protects the existing information in working memory from interference. This is an illustration of working memory in a student with ADHD. First, it's important to remember that the student with ADHD may have a smaller working memory capacity to begin with. First, the student's affective response to the history of repeated difficulties with math takes up valuable space in working memory. His slower processing speed impedes the translation of complex instruction, so he tries to hold them online verbatim. But the PA announcement has tipped the scales. He's on cognitive overload, unable to block this irrelevant information, which triggers retrieval of other information. Where's my drum? And relevant information is lost from working memory. Moreover, there's no room for those final instructions about details, about name and date. So he is left with the gestalt of the task, no details, with irrelevant information online that could disturb his performance.
In order to successfully implement interventions for students that have poor working memory, it's important to understand the components that are involved in its functioning. The most widely accepted model is Alan Baddeley and Graham Hitch's four-component model. This model consists of the central executive system, which is the command center that controls focus, divides and switches attention, and relates the content to long-term memory via the visual spatial sketchpad and the phonological loop. The phonological loop retrieves and rearticulates auditory information, and some people refer to it as the inner voice. The visual spatial sketchpad maintains mental images and spatial information, like when you read a novel and have a specific picture of what the main character looks like. Lastly, there is the episodic buffer, which is a multi-dimensional coding system that represents a separate storage system that combines other working memory components into coherent, complex structures. Basically, it creates a mental modeling system that enables the consideration of possible outcomes, hence providing the basis for planning future action. Poor working memory skills are relatively common in childhood and adolescence, and they have a substantial advanced impact on learning. The majority of children with poor working memory are slow to learn across both primary and secondary school years, and it is generally due to the overloading of this system. As educators, there are specific characteristics to look for in order to identify students that may have a deficit or an overtaxed working memory system. The following characteristics are typical of poor working memory: poor academic progress, slow to learn, poor memory and/or forgetfulness, difficulty retaining focus or high distractibility, difficulties with following instructions, difficulty adding one simple step to several previous steps, loses track or place keeping difficulties such as omitting or repeating words when writing sentences or counting activities that increase or decrease, failure to detect items in spoken or written language, i.e. filling in the missing numbers in the written number sequence or identifying rhyming words in a text, difficulty remembering some information while processing other information, such as long multiplication, good social skills and normal relationships with peers, but generally reserved in group activities or discussions. The lack of knowledge about the role of working memory in education is a typical problem among educators that is consistent throughout schools. However, once an understanding of what it is and what it looks like has been established, the knowledge can be used flexibly and powerfully in the classrooms to boost the effectiveness of teaching and the depth of students' learning. The key components or principles of remediation can be easily approached in a framework of 4 simple steps. Step number 1 is to recognize if the student's working memory is overloaded or insufficient. The second step is to reduce working memory loads or redistribute the demands that are placed on the student. If processing, i.e. cognitive load, is demanding, less information will be retained, thus creating a spiral of decline in the acquisition of knowledge and skills. The third element is to implement strategies and modifications, and lastly, monitor the effectiveness of the interventions and the student's progress. So if you think that you have a student with working memory difficulties or deficiencies, then all you have to do is have a simple checklist, something like this, and go through and say, does my student have any of these characteristics? Are they easily distracted? Do they have troubles with activities that require both storage, remembering, and processing, like manipulating information? Or do they struggle with reading comprehension and they have to read through the text repeated times? Repeated readings to comprehend. Do they struggle with solving problems that require holding information in the mind? For example, like mental math calculations. Can they do 4 plus 6 plus 2? Are they inconsistent with remembering their math facts? Are they passing those quizzes? Do they struggle with completing tasks, especially multi-step tasks that they usually cannot remember when the information is needed to guide them through the activity? Or subsequently, do they zone out? Difficulty. Have they had difficulty staying focused during cognitively demanding tasks, but they attend well when cognitive demands are minimal? Meaning, if they're engaged, are they doing well? Or if it's something that is not as engaging, do they typically check out and say, hey, it's not going to work for me today, but they're not loud or disruptive? Do they have difficulty integrating new information with prior knowledge? If you ask them to remember something, can they relate back to it? Do they have trouble waiting for their turn, for example, in a conversation or when waiting to get in line? And another thing is with that, when they're waiting their turn, do they forget what they're going to be saying when they're called on? Do they say, oh, they're like, and then they're like, oh, I forgot. Definitely problems. And do they have difficulty taking notes? For the older students that do that, can they listen and take notes? Or do they have a hard time hearing what they're reading or what you're saying, and then they're trying to write it at the same time and they're just not getting it? So if you look at some of these things and you have a checklist, and you go through, and if they're having problems with a lot of these things, then chances are they're going to have working memory problems and or deficiencies. So it's something that you'll definitely want to look at. Interventions and strategies to aid in working memory deficits should be centered around metacognitive approaches, organizational skills, and direct teaching of students. Metacognition is the awareness and understanding of one's own thought processes. It's thinking about thinking. This is essential for strategy implementation. Teachers have to be explicit and frequently model what processes look and sound like. It goes without saying that important information must be repeated regularly. Repeat, repeat, repeat. This includes general classroom management instructions, task-specific instructions, and detailed content. It's also important to limit the amount of verbal input at one time so that the student does not become cognitively overloaded. One of the most effective teaching techniques is to teach students to create their own mental imagery. Help them construct a mental image of what it looks and sounds like. To help construct a visual representation, you should use key information and words and examples that students are familiar with and can relate to. The idea is to get their thought processes working. You want to make sure that you get them going with things that they are familiar with, so one, that they will stay engaged, and two, so that they will have something to relate it back to later. If it's not something that they're interested in or means nothing to them, they're not going to retain it, and it's already difficult enough to process and retain the information. If you're working with multiplication facts, an example would be to begin with explicit demonstrations. So, let's take, for instance, you're working with multiplication. You could use something that's familiar to the kids, like a Hershey bar. There's lots of things you could do with it. It's explicitly concrete right here. It's something the kids will like. And you can motivate them with it later after the activity. So you would create this mental image in their head. After you've done this activity, you could relate back to it later, and they would already have an image in which they could have it in their mind. So, for instance, if you're doing multiplication and you do 2 times 2, you could say, you would show them explicitly 2 times 2. Now, you would definitely use your vocabulary, and you would say multiplication, it's adding, it's putting things together, it's in multiple forms. So then you would get your vocabulary going too. So you would say, hey, we've got 2, and then times 2. Well, when you add, you put together, you're going to put together and multiply. So you're going to multiply here, and you're going to do 2 times 2. And then you would, of course, have 4. Well, then you would show the students the same thing in different ways. You would say, well, you would do 1 times 4, and you would say 1 times 4. So 1, 4 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's the same thing. Later on, you could do this with division and do the same thing with the Hershey bars, but with division, and they would already have this mental image of what it would be like, in that the squares are evenly distributed, assuming that you break it up the correct way and that you don't miss out on the perforated spots. So it's very important for metacognitive strategies that you are very explicit, and the idea is that the students are thinking about their thinking. So they're thinking about, well, what happens if I have 2 of them, then I wanted to multiply times 2 again, then you have it. In reading, you can easily teach students to create visual images by conducting think-alouds. After you have repeatedly modeled the process, you then provide students an opportunity and guidance to choose useful, appropriate strategies so that they can monitor their own comprehension. When engaging in think-alouds, tell the students that you will be stopping occasionally to ask them what they are thinking, or to explain the image that they have formed and what made them think of this. It is also important and helpful to pre-teach the key concepts that your lesson focuses on. So I'm going to demonstrate. We're going to do a think aloud. So we want to mainly create a vision or a visual image in our head. And you might even want to make one of these for your students. It kind of gets them engaged a little bit more. So take, for instance, we're reading the book Encyclopedia Brown. So you would say, today class, I'm introducing a new book. It may or may not be something you've heard of. It's kind of an old book. It's from when, my mom was a kid. So you would say that, something like that, and you would say, there might be some things in here we might not know about, or we may know about them. For instance, we don't even typically have encyclopedias anymore. Does anybody know what an encyclopedia is? Some of the children might know, they might not know. So at that point, you would say, well, so let's figure it out from the book. I bet they're going to probably tell us in the book what an encyclopedia is. So that's one thing we may want to look for. So let's begin. Chapter 1, The Case of Natty Nat. Mr. and Mrs. Brown had one child. They called him Leroy, and so did his teachers. Everyone else in Idaville called him Encyclopedia. An encyclopedia is a book or a set of books giving information arranged alphabetically on all branches of knowledge. Ooh, an encyclopedia. It's a book or it's a set of books that give off information. Oh, and it's arranged alphabetically. Oh, we have our word wall here in the classroom. It's arranged alphabetically. So, is it like a dictionary, which has words alphabetically? Or is it like Wikipedia? Oh, maybe it's like Wikipedia. Because it said that it's like books giving information, and they're arranged alphabetically. That's what an encyclopedia is. So I think it's going to be like Wikipedia or Google search engine. Leroy Brown's head was like an encyclopedia. It was filled with facts he had learned from his books. He was like a complete library walking around in sneakers. Ding. Like a library. So it's books that teach you things. Okay. Old ladies who did crossword puzzles were always stopping him on the street to ask him questions. Just last Sunday after church, Mrs. Conway, the butcher's wife, had asked him, what is a three-letter word for a Swiss river beginning with A? Dictionaries have words. They're in alphabetical order. She wants to know a three-letter word. So encyclopedia is like a dictionary. Let's keep going. Encyclopedia wanted to be helpful, but he was always afraid that people might not like him if he answered their questions too quickly or sounded too smart. His father asked him more questions than anyone else. Mr. Brown was the chief of police in Idaville. The town had 4 banks, 3 movie theaters, and a little league. It had the usual number of gasoline stations, churches, schools, stores, and comfortable houses on shady streets. It even had a mansion or 2 and some dingy sections. And it had the average number of crimes for a community of its size. Idaville, however, only looked like the usual American town. It was really most unusual. For nearly a whole year, no criminal had escaped arrest, and no boy or girl had gotten away with breaking a single law in Idaville. This was partly because of the town's policemen were clever and brave, but mostly it was because Chief Brown was Encyclopedia's father. So Encyclopedia Brown, he's very smart. He's called an encyclopedia, which is books that are in alphabetical order where you learn things. I bet he's kind of nerdy looking. I bet he's got glasses. I bet he walks around with books all the time. That's got to be how he's so smart. So anyways, this is how you would do a think aloud. You explicitly show the kids and explain to them what's in your head, and you're thinking out loud. So that's essentially what you would have the kids do. So once you get them trained and things are going smoothly, then you can get them to start doing it on their own. You would just read and all of a sudden, stop and say, "Hey, Johnny, what do you think he looks like? What do you think an encyclopedia is?" "Well, what in the book made you say it?" You've got to be very explicit, and you've got to be repetitive and do it the same way, step by step, because people with working memory overloads get very overwhelmed very quickly and lose their train of thought and forget what they're going to say or what they were processing to begin with. So you've got to be repetitive, and you've got to be simple, explicit, and show them how to think. In addition to think aloud procedures, encourage students to use memory aids. The use of such aids help reduce processing demands in the storage load of tasks so that students can help keep their place. For math, tools such as number lines, 100s counting charts, and visuals that show various ways to represent a number are great for younger students. For older students, tools such as quick reference equation sheets or step-by-step reminders for solving equations are ideal. For writing, memory aids such as sentence starters and punctuation rule charts are also very helpful. Make sure that aids are directly accessible by having them on the student's desk or on the wall so that they are very easily visible. For instance, the 100s chart is usually on a wall in the younger grades, primary, and it helps the kids remember the numbers if they lose their place, what it looks like. For younger kids also, number lines go directly on their desk. You can get one like this. It has shapes, it has the letters, kind of things like that. It doesn't have to cost money. It can be very easily done on pieces of paper that you just tape to the desk. It's not going to make or break the bank. It shouldn't. It's used as a reference so the students have something to refer back to. Here's some sentence starters. Again, it's very easy to do. You could write these on the board or have a chart or something we'll talk about later in a binder so that the students have it with them. They're organized. Punctuation charts. And these are usually things that are up in the classrooms anyways. Some people refer to them as anchor charts, but it's very important that the students use these strategies and actually use these memory aids rather than just notice that they're up on the wall or that they're on their desk or in their desk. They need to be actually using them. That is the key. If they're not using them, then there is no point. They're not going to be remembered, and they're not going to be helpful. For older kids, geometry, different equations for the different shapes, and again, maybe reminders for different equations, like linear equation, I think this one is. So very easy, but make sure it's concrete. Here's one for the numbers for the students to be able to see different ways that the numbers look. It's very helpful. Make sure it's concrete. Make sure it's up and they can use it as a reference. One of the most widely used metacognitive approaches is the use of mnemonics. Mnemonics are any device that help the brain translate information into a form that can be retained or remembered. In science, a popular mnemonic for remembering the order of the planets is, "My very educated mother just served us 9 pizzas." So in case you've never heard of it or you'd like to see it in action, this is what you would do. You would say, "My very educated mother just served us 9 pizzas." And again, this is for the planets: Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. And it's something that the kids could actually come up with on their own if you don't have one in mind. Or for the math, the famous one is, "Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally's loud radio." which stands for parentheses, exponent, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction, and then go left to right. In geography, you might remember the ones for the Great Lakes, generally is used for homes, which would be Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, Superior. And there's a website, if you can't come up with your own and you don't want to spend time with the kids coming up with it, which would be ideal because then it would be something they would definitely remember more and process more. But if not, if you need something quick and something that to help you guys get going, www.mnemonic-device.com has 300 and plus free mnemonic devices. And it has over 50 different categories, including the various school subjects, law, weather, electronics, foreign languages, medical, and music. And it's all appropriate for any age level. But like I said, the key would be to have the students come up with them. That way it's more meaningful and something that they are definitely going to remember more. And it'd be a little more engaging for them. But mnemonics is a great strategy for working memory deficits.
Mnemonic devices do not have to be exclusively acronyms. As long as it helps to remember a certain concept or idea, it's considered to be a mnemonic device. If you really want an individual to recall particular information, it is best to include multiple modalities when presenting the idea. Using music is one of the most effective means to retaining desired material. For instance, if you Google the most famous phone number, the first one that comes up is 201-867-5309. If I state it this way, it might not sound so famous, but if I presented it musically, you most likely would recall the most famous number. Take a listen. Now I'm sure that you remember the phone number, 867-5309. If I wanted to present other information, not just a song like this, I'm sure that you would understand and remember a lot of other things as well. Take, for instance, advertising. Advertisers use music. That way the people will remember the company or the product that they're trying to sell. If I were to play this jingle or this montage of jingles, I'm sure that you would probably remember most, if not all, of the advertisements that are being advertised.
Give me a break, break me off a piece of that Kit Kat bar. Pep Boys is everything for less. Ba 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 ba, I'm loving it. Meow 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 meow. Best part of waking up is Folgers in your cup. The best part of waking up is Folgers in your $5 foot long. $5 foot long. What would you do for a Klondike bar? We are farmers. Bum ba dum bum 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 bum. Red Robin. Yup. Could've got you free credit for .com. I could have seen this coming at me like an atom bomb. They monitor your credit and send you email alerts so you don't end up selling fish to tourists in t-shirts. I'm stuck on Band-Aid 'cause Band-Aid stuck on me. I'm stuck on Band-Aid 'cause Band-Aid stuck on me. wiener, everyone would be in love with me. I want my baby back, baby back, baby back. I want my baby back, baby back, baby back. I want my baby back, baby back, baby back. I want my baby back, baby back, baby back. I want my chili. I want my baby back ribs. I want my chili. I want my baby back ribs.
So, I'm sure that you realized most of those or recognized them. And you can do this with students as well, and it works very, very effectively. Take, for instance, the word baloney. That's a very difficult word. But because of Oscar Mayer and the jingle that they had, B-O-L-O-G-N-A, now it's easier to remember and to spell. For students that have working memory deficits or deficiencies, or that just have overload, these are some strategies that work very well for them, and you could work very well for teachers and educators to be able to do it, and it can be fun. So, when remembering mnemonic devices, they don't just have to be acronyms. It's anything that helps the student learn. And yes, music is one of the best and most effective means for getting this to happen.
In addition to metacognitive approaches, organizational skills are essential for helping students that have difficulty with working memory processes. First and foremost, tasks should be broken down. Break down multiple step instructions into separate steps, giving students time to perform each stage. For example, stop what you're doing, and then you would wait for them to stop, and then you would say, first job, clear your desk. So you give a little time, they'd clear their desk. Then you would say, second job, stand behind your chair. Third, line up at the door. By breaking these tasks up, it makes it much easier to process and is more essential for the students that have working memory deficits to be able to do it. That way they're not overwhelmed. Make sure that your directions are clear and simple. And if it's possible, you can demonstrate. So for example, if your directions are that you're going to do an activity based off of a book that the students just read, then you would say, I'm going to give you your reading book and a graphic organizer, and you will complete the graphic organizer based upon your book, and you will refer back to your book as necessary. So, you're going to take your book and your story map, and what you're going to do is you're going to use your book to fill it in. Now, ideally, you've probably already been through this activity, so the students should already know how to use it. But if they don't, you would say, okay, well, here is the setting. So you're going to look back into your book. Maybe where did it happen? But in the middle goes the name of the book and the author, which you can find here on the cover. So you would go through it like that, but quickly and simple if you've already done this kind of activity. By consistently presenting instructions in a broken down manner, you're essentially engaging in a strategy known as chunking. Chunking is organizing material into an already familiar pattern. Research has proven that the average person can remember 7 items at a time. But if you combine the information into chunks, you are more likely to retain the information in long-term memory. The most common example of chunking in everyday use is remembering a phone number. So, for instance, the area code is always 3 digits, and it's usually put in parentheses. So we'll say your area code is 512. You've chunked it up. Then you might say your prefix is 821, again chunking it up with a hyphen in between. 0, 2, 0, 3. So you have 4 more numbers. However, if you just did it like this with all 7 numbers, it might not be able to remember it as well and as easily. So you wouldn't say 512-821-0203. No, normally you would say 512-821-0203. So you kind of put a little pause in between and chunked it. In the area of reading, chunking can be very beneficial to help students to decode words or remember how to spell a particular word. For example, if you were trying to write the word position, you might think of it as po-zi-tion. Now, you can spell it like that because you've already been taught, at least by this point in time, with this word, you've been taught that the word is, that you know it's pronounced, the T-I-O-N, first part is shun. So you would already see that part at the end, and so you know that. Then that makes it already easier because then you could cover it and be like, you wouldn't say poo-zi-shun or pot-si-shun. But if you did, you would know that there is not a word like that, but you would know the word position, so it would make more sense. So therefore, you've chunked it up and used your mental images that we've talked about before in order to help you to decode the word. The same as when I was writing it out and I spelled it. Strategies such as chunking are really beneficial for students that have difficulty, or any person has difficulty with these kind of tasks. Other organizational strategies that help students have working memory difficulties include writing lists, providing rubrics and templates, and teaching them various methods for general organization. For instance, if students have oftentimes forget what they're going to say, or they need to remember things right away and they have a difficult time, like if you're watching a video or something, give them a little bitty notepad and just have them jot down things as you're letting them watch a video for educational purposes, or for things like when they're in the group and there's a discussion, they have to wait their turn. A little notepad with them or a little piece of paper, they could jot it down real quick, and then they don't forget what they were going to ask or the comment that they were going to make that has to do with whatever topic you're discussing. Lists are very important. To-do list, calendars for the week, maybe by day, by subject, depending on the age of the student, make the best plan ever. And it's very important that you teach the student to use it and that you monitor them. That way they are taking ownership and responsibility, and the tasks are being implemented into their long-term memory. So you might say for the day, what task you might need to do, such as like daily homework. You could say 1 math, 2 reading log, and 3 spelling words. And it's very important to have the student, as soon as they do it, to check it off. That way they're monitoring themselves and whether or not it's being accomplished. And they're, again, coming back to it and being mindful. Now, if they're older, the calendar might help by the week. That way, if they don't go to class every day and they're in high school, then they've got it written down in a weekly calendar. Again, monitoring the student and having them actually utilize the strategy is the most important. If they're not using the strategy, they're not going to be effective. It's not going to work. Another key element to helping a student be organized and remembering tasks is to have them keep an assignment binder or an organizational binder, whether it be for particular assignments or subjects, or all of subjects together. It just depends on the student and how old they are and what their workload is. And what the best thing is for the binders are the tabs, the divider pages with tabs where the student can actually organize it themselves, such as these right here within a binder. And again, you need to stay on the student because generally these students are not organized and they are not the typical, I can remember what to do. They seem to be scatterbrained. So it's very important that you help them out with their binder and you help them start it. And then you monitor them, but you need to make sure that, hey, right now you got to put that paper in that binder in the 3 rings. You can't just put it inside the binder without the 3 rings because typically it's going to get lost. And then you're going to be without your assignment and not do it at all. So, and if you want to have a specific checklist, that's good too. That normally helps. And then lastly, you may want to have a section inside your binder for that particular or subject, depending, but for their resources that we talked about earlier, as far as their cheat sheets, as some people may call them, but their anchor charts or their graphic organizers or whatever is used to help with the students' assignment, whatever they're allowed to use. So their memory aids, as we referred to them earlier. So you may need to instruct them specifically, hey, it needs to be in this section of your binder, and you'll pull it out when you need it. And again, ask them throughout their work if they are using it, if they would like to use it, and make sure that they are putting it in the rings, not just inside the binder. It will come out. In summary, working memory is essential to acquiring new knowledge and skills and to student success at school. If a student has deficits in this area, then there are specific strategies that can be implemented for effective remediation. The framework in which educators can easily approach students is carried out in 4 simple steps. Recognize that the student's working memory is overloaded or insufficient. 2, reduce working memory load. 3, implement specific strategies. And 4, monitor the progress. When considering strategies to helping working memory, remember to allow students to use memory aids, use metacognitive strategy, and teach students to be organized.
Overall, the key to remediating difficulties in working memory and solving achievement gaps is implementing evidence-based practice with fidelity. Therefore, it is up to educators and school personnel to be knowledgeable and proactive and realize that with the right kinds of strategy, instruction, and support, there are no limits to the success that students can and will achieve.